BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all of your sports betting action. With baseball season in full swing, we're deep into the NBA and NHL finals, and BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are still being played. We keep the dog days of summer rolling with the largest selection of odds on everything, with updated odds on Major League Baseball, UFC, and boxing, to tennis and NFL futures. BetOnline remains the best online source for all of your sports wagering information. In between games, just head on over to the BetOnline casino with all of the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengal podcast with yours truly, Solomon Wilcots, and our Cincinnati Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie, how you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
Hey, look, I'm doing great. Lots of news to discuss as it pertains to the Cincinnati Bengals. And look, as recently as Sunday over the weekend, ESPN reporters are now saying that the Cincinnati Bengals and Trey Hendrickson have resumed negotiation conversations about his new contract. These two seemed worlds apart, and it didn't help that that he was not in the mandatory mini camp. I don't know that any of us expected, but it would have been nice to see him there just to get in with Al Golden. But what can you say about where things are now? I guess it's a good thing that both sides are back to having a conversation.
Definitely. What I don't expect is I don't expect the Bengals to budge from their stance, which has been that they're not in a spot to give Hendrickson a long-term deal with significant guaranteed money. I don't think the Bengals have changed in their willingness to give Hendrickson, say, the Max Crosby deal. Now, what does Hendrickson want, and how much has changed from his perspective? And does he recognize an opportunity and value still on a short-term deal? Is he putting more value into that than maybe he was a month ago? I do think those are the types of things that can give these conversations some momentum.
Man, when you talk about, okay, let's throw out a number here. What we think will make Trey Hendrickson happy? Think about it. I don't know that he's asking for the $40 million a year that Myles Garrett is getting. But when he's looking at the production of a Max Crosby or a Danielle Hunter, who are the next guys on that ladder at $35 million a year, and you look at what, say, Micah Parsons is going to get or what a TJ Watt could be getting, I think he wants to come in there somewhere around 35. Certainly he's not going to fall below $30 million a year. So in terms of the math that you come up with, what do you think he's willing to settle for, if not at the highest on that ladder? Somewhere in between 35 and 40 sounds like the number, even though he might take a little bit less.
I think the most important things as this deal gets negotiated is the long-term guarantees, because if it was, say, a deal that would pay him $35 a year for 3 years, but say only the first year that is guaranteed, based on what Hendrickson has said so far, he said he wouldn't be interested in that style of deal because that wouldn't give him the long-term security that he's been prioritizing. Now, and that's then the Bengals side, which is that they're not going to be giving him a deal with those long-term guarantees. My question is, would Hendrickson be willing to step into something more short-term? Looking for a number, I still would be closer to 30 because of some knocks in Hendrickson's game, or maybe even below 40 or below 30. I'm closer to that number than 35. I think that best represents where Hendrickson is at in his career. He had the opportunity to speak with other teams and see what the market was for him when the Bengals gave him the permission to explore a trade. I think that process gave Hendrickson a better understanding of the fact that there are certain caps on what teams around the league, if he hit free agency, would be willing to give him. So that might be factoring into his thought process here as well.
I got to ask you this about the age. For whatever reason, the Bengals seem stuck on this. He's 31, so that gives them maybe opportunity to bring the price down a little bit. TJ Watt's 31. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not hearing this out of Pittsburgh that the age of the player seems to be an impediment. In an age where players are so much prone to having much better nutrition, that players are playing well beyond that age of 30 and still being productive in today's NFL. Why are we still applying that number that we were using 30 years ago when I played, Charlie, as that line of demarcation for decline, even though we have all these metrics that say today's players are taking better care of themselves from a nutrition standpoint, from a conditioning standpoint, that you're not seeing this precipitous decline at the age of 30. We haven't seen that so far with Trey, but for whatever reason, the Bengals seem to want to operate and get a discount simply because of the age of the player here.
Now, the difference, too, between him and TJ Watt is, and Hendrickson's a fantastic player, but Watt's a much better run defender. I think he's a better athlete, and he has a game that will age more gracefully than Hendrickson's game. Well, Hendrickson is so power-oriented, power, and he's truly elite at that as a rusher, but he has to have a very high batting average for that to win. I think he's going to continue to do that. But the other supplementary pieces of his game are the difference I think you see between him and some of the top guys. And then you factor in how will that completely power-oriented game evolve and adjust as he gets older and as he maybe loses 1%, 2%, 3% of what he's able to do. I think there's more of a risk of a steeper drop-off with Hendrickson than there is with a guy like TJ Watt.
Yeah, I think the Bengals have a case if TJ Watt is asking for $40 million a year. I don't think they have a case if he's asking for slightly above $30 million a year. He has produced at that level. Why would you predict any kind of precipitous decline simply because he's 31? I get it. He's more of a power rusher, and power rushers aren't as nimble and nifty at turning the corner after they begin to age. I get it. But to bet against him, despite the fact that he has a tremendous high character, tremendous leadership, he's a force multiplier in terms of making other players better around him, that if that number comes in just a little bit north of $30 million a year, then to be able to guarantee $60 million over the next 2 seasons, I think that's the beginning of having a fruitful conversation. But I want to move on because you and I talked recently about Shemar Stewart, and he's made some comments that got a lot of people around town talking, a lot of people nationally talking about the Cincinnati Bengals as they continue to have these contract disputes year over year, whether it's Jesse Bates, whether it's T. Higgins, whether it's Jamar Chase, or now Trey Hendrickson. To have it with a first-round pick where these contracts are really much slotted, they're really made to prevent long contractual holdouts by rookie players. Here the Bengals are adding language that's leading to a contractual impasse. Before I get to what Shemar Stewart had to say, what have you made of all of this with the Bengals wanting to include language that takes away guaranteed money that really has already been collectively bargained, Charlie?
What it is another example of negotiations never quite feeling easy. This has kind of become the expectation for negotiations between the Bengals and players. When you look at how every single one of these, aside from, Ted Karras's 1-year extension, have gone over the last 4 seasons, even Joe Burrow going all the way down until the wire. Now, which language is right? Gray Zabel and Walter Nolan had the language the Bengals were trying to use. Miles Murphy and Dax Hill had the language that Stewart would like to use. I don't know that I have a thought on which language is right, but the lack of flexibility in the negotiations is a common theme that we keep showing up. It's now a part of the reputation, or it's a continued part of the reputation that a new generation of young players is becoming very, very familiar with. And that reputation, continues to be recognized around the league the more you see situations play out this publicly across your roster.
Now, I got to say this because I've been asked, and so I did some reporting. I went and dug and made some calls. What I'm hearing when it comes to, okay, what language are we even talking about? Like, right, what language could you insert into the contract that would allow you as a team to void some of the money that's already guaranteed to the player? What we're hearing is that language is along the lines of conduct detrimental to the team. You and I both know, Charlie, that's a broad language. Like, what is conduct detrimental? Is that being late to work? maybe being late multiple times? Can they now take away money that's guaranteed to the player because he's late to work? I would think an agent and the player would say, no, I'm not signing that. If it says conduct detrimental, if you're arrested and now you're suspended, can we take away money? That now you got a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. So I wanted to kind of lay that out to you. But think about it. When Shemar Stewart said, I'm not asking for anything that you have not done for other players. He's right. No other players have signed a contract with this language. And then he went on to say, you seem to be more interested in winning arguments than winning games. That seemed to have, like this is what players are talking about in the locker room. That seemed to have played out in a lot of these negotiations that have served as a distraction, preventing this team from hitting the ground running and winning games at the beginning of the year, that everyone seems to be thinking what Shemar Stewart is saying clearly.
It's another repeated example, even coming off a year where the Jamar Chase contract stuff was clearly an admitted distraction for Chase, for the offense, for everyone involved. And it's a repeated action by the Bengals, which is an organization that obviously should be doing everything in its power to avoid making mistakes that it's already made. And so, it's funny too, like what would even have to happen for this language to even matter in Stewart's contract? Is this the fight to pick? And is it worth it? I guess we'll see in September, but I would assume it's probably not worth it. Again, just more continued trends by the Bengals front office.
Shemar Stewart said that he's talked to a lot of the veteran players. There are several players who recently been drafted in the first round, and they don't have this language in their contract. He said that many of the players have told him he's right. He felt good enough to walk away from the mandatory minicamp and just leave the premises. And he said that many of the veteran players support his stance. With that said, does this have the chance to have some kind of negative effect on the beginning of the season, as we talked about team morale suffering as a result of these protracted contract holdouts? Here's a kid that could have the nuclear option of deciding not to sign a contract at all with the Cincinnati Bengals. And because of NIL money and other endorsement deals, he could end up sitting out a year, maybe going back and playing another year of college. There are a lot of other things that he can do, but you and I both know that would not spell well for the Cincinnati Bengals.
And again, you just shouldn't be at this point, kind of on both sides too. And Stewart's made some mistakes. I think leaving minicamp was a distraction. I think the comments that he wasn't making it first, but then doubled down on and obviously became national news. That's the only reason this has become a national story, is because of Stewart's action. Now the comments and the leaving minicamp, that is his only leverage. That's all Shemar Stewart can do here. Mm-hmm. There's nothing else in his power, and I understand that and I respect that. But it is the action coming from the players that's made this as prominent of a topic as it's been. You mentioned the reaction from the locker room. Like, we just don't know what those conversations have been. Like, who have they been with? If the 90th guy on the roster gives you a fist bump, well, is that a conversation from someone in the locker room about, supporting you through this process? I don't know that Joe Burrow has taken him out to dinner and laid out the plan here going forward. Like, it's somewhere in the middle, obviously. And I lean more towards kind of the first point than the second point about kind of Stewart's connection with the locker room as he goes through all this to some extent. And that includes things that Shemar Stewart told me. He said the only guy he's really talked to is his friend McKinley Jackson. So all that adds up in just a spot Stewart shouldn't be, the Bengals shouldn't be, and something they've got to figure
out. Let me ask you this. Who's the player rep for the
Ted
Players
Karras.
Association? Okay. I would imagine he's had a conversation with his player rep. Now, I'm not going to sit and throw Ted Karras' name in the middle of it, because if Shemar Stewart didn't say that, then I'm not going to go there. I would just suspect that a rookie player who has a player rep that sort of governs this kind of thing and helps players who are dealing with this kind of nuanced issue understand what his rights are. So I think we can assume that some of those conversations have been had, not to try to weigh in on what Ted Karras would actually say or did say to one Shemar Stewart. But I got to ask you this, because I'm feeling a little bit, I I feel sorry for Al Golden. He's the defensive coordinator. He's trying to get his defense installed. And his two best defensive linemen did not suit up during the mandatory portion of minicamp. Trey Hendrickson was not there. Shemar Stewart was there, but did not take to the practice field and then end up leaving. How difficult is this for their new defensive coordinator who's trying to get this defense going in the right direction, Charlie?
Al Golden, smiled through that question when he was asked, and he was like, it's a great opportunity to develop some guys in different spots. And there's something to that. But I focus a lot on Jerry Montgomery, the new defensive line coach. Something that multiple players told me was how much the technique side of it has changed and how it's more demanding and more technical than what they've been doing before. And a couple of guys even said it's been frustrating for a couple of guys trying to get the technique and the process and the programming down that they're going through on the defensive line from that perspective. And now Hendrickson will probably just come in and, as he should, rush however he wants. He's earned that. But from a Shemar Stewart standpoint, I bet that there are key things that he's missing out on that might make things more difficult for him whenever he returns to practice.
Is there a chance Shemar Stewart listened to some of the stuff that's out there of his? He does have an opportunity not to sign any contract. The Bengals are willing to not move back from this clause in the contract that allows them to take away guaranteed money that has been collectively bargained. Doesn't look like his agent's going to allow him to sign it. Is there a chance that he could push or take the nuclear option here and not play this upcoming season for the Bengals?
Well, he's kind of already taken what we thought would be the nuclear option. Obviously, there's an even more extreme nuclear option that you're alluding to there. I don't know. Shemar's going to have to sit down and decide how important this is to him and whether or not it's worth it. And if it is, more power to him. I'm all for players taking stances. But this is also, there are consequences, and this is also impacting him. It's impacting the team. It's reflecting negatively on the team. It's also reflecting on Shemar as he kind of gets out on a limb here. That does reflect negatively on the team. I do think there's now an ongoing narrative that's beginning to rise at a national level. Look, you live in Cincinnati. I live here too. You know what the fans say in the quiet conversations of the pool halls and the pubs and the coffee houses around town. They're beginning to grow frustrated with the repeated narrative, that there's this sort of confrontation between player and management, always about contract, and that there seems to be this game of brinksmanship. And even Paul Dehner Jr. wrote in The Athletic, this is now beginning to fester. Charlie, just what's your sense as a person who lives here in the town? What are you hearing amongst the fans and the people and where they're at? And could it serve as another distraction if this isn't put to bed by the time we get to training camp in about 40 days? I think there's another key part of this conversation too, which is it didn't feel like the Bengals did everything in their power to improve the roster during the offseason, leaving positions like safety unaddressed. You would have liked them to have gotten another defensive tackle. Demetrius Knight can be a solid starter, and I'm interested to see what he does, but you wanted him to get a starting linebacker in free agency, a starting guard. Like, there was so much that they just haven't done. And have they set up this team to give itself its best chance to win the Super Bowl? I think there are more things they could have done. Now, I'm not saying they can't do it, but I think there are things they could have done to have given themselves a better shot entering the season. And I think that frustration is what you hear the most.
So you're basically saying if they can bring back Trey Hendrickson, right? This is essentially the same teams they had a year ago. Is that your thoughts?
I mean, TJ Slayton was the big ad, and I like TJ, but one nose tackle doesn't fix a defense. And this is a team that will, no matter what, have significant questions at defensive end, defensive tackle, linebacker 2, every cornerback position, in both safety spots, plus both offensive guard spots entering the season. That's just where they're at.
So a lot of movement this offseason, but essentially landing back where they were at the end of last year. Is that your thought?
They are back where they were. They're counting on a step from Cam Taylor-Britt. They're counting on Dax Hill, and they're Jordan Battle, and it's all the same faces. And Miles Murphy, this has to be the year. Like, it's all the same faces, especially on defense, and they're banking on new coaches and some better luck being the difference.
All right, you got to take a look at the 3-day mini camp. Any pleasant surprises? What were your main takeaways? What did you see?
Well, first, Joe Burrow looks fantastic. And I know that, we overreact to these mini camps, but the offense is really set up, I think, to start the season strong, which has been the bugaboo. But I think this is the best passing attack in the league. And if the guards are just fine, or just 5s out of 10, then this is going to be a really special offense. That'll even be better than it was last season. I mean, Chase Brown's prime for a breakout. Yoshivas is stepping into a bigger role. Gesicki really knows how he fits, which he didn't even last October. He didn't figure that out until the back half of the season. Some more observations, Demetrius Knight, they're pushing their chips in with him. They're impressed by his speed, his reaction time, his reaction ability, and his tackling instincts. Josh Newton has stepped into a more vocal role. Cam Taylor-Britt looks like he's in a much better place and is much more well set up to be successful this season. But then there are still questions with what you see on the defensive line depth. I think Geno Stone remains a question. The nickel spot at corner remains a question. Guard, definitely. You'd like to see more growth continue from Jermaine Burton as well. But definitely a lot of interesting stuff going on the field.
All right, I'm going to mention some names. Some of them you just mentioned, but I want to get maybe just a little bit more in terms of what you saw in the minicamp, but more importantly, what are the expectations for these individuals as we go into training camp? You talked about Cam Taylor-Britt. They're playing him some more now inside, where I think he could be really good as a nickel dime defender, less out on the perimeter. What are you seeing there? What are the thoughts moving forward in Al Golden's defense for one Cam Taylor-Britt, who we know can play, but Cam Taylor-Britt is phenomenal, but just maybe a little bit more discipline, a little more focus, can have high yield.
Massive questions throughout the secondary. I think the one thing we know this group can do very well is they are a very versatile group, especially at corner. And so Al Golden, as he lays this foundation down, they are leaning more into the versatility. So it wasn't just Cam. Okay. It was Josh Newton, DJ Turner, Dax Hill when he comes back. They're all going to be inside, outside. There will be much less defined roles on this defense than there were previously. Like, here's the perfect comparison. The Bengals had Tyler Boyd in the slot for 5 years. And then Boyd leaves. And then last year, all right, you're mixing Yoshivas in the slot. All right, now Jamar's in the slot all the time. Gesicki's in the slot a bunch. And it was all these different pieces that they were able to open up. And we both love Mike Hilton. This is a pro Mike Hilton podcast. But with Mike Hilton not taking up every single slot snap, there are different things you can do than what you've done before.
Yeah, he was primarily a slot defender. So if you wanted to move things around, you had to take him off the field to sort of get those other pieces where you wanted them. Now with him no longer on the roster, there's greater flexibility. Having said that, I had to ask you about Joseph Osai, because I did hear Al Golden mention you're able to get him more reps. The retirement of Sam Hubbard. They don't have Shemar Stewart on the practice field means more reps for Joseph Osai. What are you seeing with him? What are the expectations there?
Just physically, he kind of looks stronger and more rugged than he did previously. It was this, heading into last year, he had his first full normal healthy offseason. Now he has his second fully normal healthy offseason. I think that's been a big help for him in just his preparation, what he's been able to do to get ready. And then just follow the money. I mean, the Bengals made a pretty nice investment in Joseph Osai, believing what he could do for their pass rush. When he was, I believe, their second biggest spend during free agency. So there's clearly a belief in the really impressive stretch that he put together over like the last 7 games of the 2024 season. They clearly believe in that. He's probably the leader in the clubhouse to start at defensive end right now, opposite Trey Hendrickson, and he's also stepping into a bigger leadership role.
And Jermaine Burton, here's a young player, seems more clear-headed, more clear-eyed and ready than, say, this time last year. Is that a fair statement? And what do you expect as they head into training camp from him?
The coaches have liked all the little things, the way he answers questions, preparedness, details, and the routes on the practice field. Now he's got to keep doing it and keep proving it. Here's what I keep going back to with Jermaine. At some point in a very big spot this season, they're going to need Jermaine Burton to catch a 40-yard ball down the sideline on a go route. And that's going to be a big moment. Now, I can't tell you when that's going to be. It could be in the last 2 minutes against the Ravens, or it could be the first play of the game against the Jaguars. Who knows? It could be. But there will come that point, and it could be a very important point. And Jermaine, and since you never know when it's going to be, Jermaine, he has to keep staying on the right track, because if he gets his opportunity, but then that's when he slips up, then you lose. So Jermaine, again, you never know when it's going to come, but he's got to be ready for a shot. So far, he's done the right stuff, but there's the unpredictability of when the shot's going to come. So that leads to an uncertainty of, all right, you got to keep showing it over the course of the next several months.
Look, for him, it's about consistency and doing the little things consistently day in and day out. If he can do those things, Charlie, I mean, that's another straw in the cap for the Cincinnati Bengals offense. You and I both know how Zach Taylor feels about Jermaine Burton and his capability and his potential. And now it just has to come to fruition and allow Joe Burrow to feel the same way and have a high level of confidence in him as well. So, but a lot of really wonderful opportunities here, but there are a lot of pieces on the chessboard, aren't there, that really do have to come together in order for 2025 to be better than it was a year ago. Is that a fair statement?
For sure. I will say this, though, and you mentioned Burton, and that has me going down this rabbit hole. Aside from interior offensive line, I guess offensive line as a whole, and defensive tackle, the Bengals have better depth than they had last season. I'm a big fan of their depth at quarterback, running back, tight end, receiver, defensive end, linebacker, corner, and safety. So that's pretty good. Yeah. There's good depth here. They like what they have in a lot of different spots, and there's some very sharp pieces to work.
Last thing before we let you go, Jermaine Pratt did sign with the Las Vegas Raiders. He's over there with Zach Carter now, former Cincinnati Bengal. This was kind of inevitable, but did it have to end the way that it did, unceremoniously? A guy who had played very well here, did a lot for the organization, had been a team captain. I thought it could have been handled and managed in a much better way.
Yeah, I wish they would have cut him in March when it wasn't clear or when it was clear that he wasn't a part of this team's future for 2025, and it felt like the drama that led to how this ended kind of took away from some of the positive contributions that Jermaine certainly had.
That's right.
Memorable plays, clutch moments, just a really good linebacker who fell off in 2024, and that's okay. That's life, and maybe he needs a change of scenery to get back to the best version of himself. But one of the Bengals' best picks of the Zach Taylor era past round one for sure in Jermaine Pratt.
Charlie Goldsmith, you're the best, my friend. We appreciate you stopping by the Bleav in Bengal podcast to share with us. Of course, we'll be back next week. We hope you join us right here on Bleav in Bengals.